All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming out here to our 5th annual summer event. We'll get everyone kind of coming in. There'll be more folks kind of coming in throughout the day, I'm sure. Awesome crowd here so far. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. This is our 5th of these conferences that we're hosting. Hopefully the change of venue works well for everybody. This is our first time doing this TopSoil Summit and doing our event here at the casino. Throughout the whole day, the concept of all of this is connecting companies and their corporate ambitions with farmers and the things we've got to do on our family farms to be successful and to implement more sustainable practices and build out soil health. For those that don't know me, my name is Mitchell Hora. I founded Continuum Ag in 2015, and we've been able to build out a heck of a team and just trying to be a part of this soil health movement. I'm going to share a little bit of some of our updates later on here today, but my whole team is running around. We all kind of are matching in our Continuum Ag stuff, so if you need anything, hit up any of our people. They can help you get whatever you need. Kind of the schedule here throughout the whole day, and just kind of to tee some stuff up here. This morning, we're going to hear about kind of the corporate side of things. What's happening from the global perspective? What's happening from the top down? What are we hearing? And Sam is going to keynote. He's with Rabobank Research. And then we're going to get into some of the players in the supply chain, some of the stuff happening. You're going to hear a lot today about low carbon fuels and carbon intensity and how this story and this data that we've been collecting off our farms is going to be really important in the supply chain. I'm going to give a little talk here before lunch. We've got some lunch here later on. And then after lunch, we've got a farmer keynote. Our buddy Johnny Hunter, he's a regenerative rice farmer from down in southeast Missouri. And then we've got a farmer panel to wrap things up here. After we get done here today, around 3 o'clock, we've got a reception and some demonstrations and soil pit and stuff like that at our family farm. It's only a 12, 15-minute drive, probably less than that. So we'll get rendezvoused over there. The address is on your pamphlet, and we'll have some materials on it as we get transitioned over to that here later on as well. Wanted to start, thanks to Organics for sponsoring breakfast here this morning. Thanks to all of our sponsors, especially our major sponsors, Huma and Bosafra. It obviously takes a lot to put on events like this, and luckily for me, I don't have to do a whole lot of it anymore. My team's been able to really run the show and take this and put it on and make sure that it's a good day for all of you. So this is all about learning. It's all about building out this network, taking things even further. So make sure, meet the people around you, shake hands. There's some really, really key important folks that are in this room, and we're excited to just continue to push that network and push all that forward. One of the guys that isn't in the room here today, though, wanted to kind of start with, and that's Dave Brandt. And Dave was scheduled to come. Dave is the godfather of soil health and passed away here tragically about 2 weeks ago. And Dave was planning on coming, like I said, which to me is just such a huge honor and so just humbling that the godfather of soil health was going to come over from Ohio to be here with all of us here today, and he had a whole schedule of stuff throughout the whole week. And in Dave's honor, we wanted to present a little scholarship with Dave's registration and make sure that Dave's registration got passed on. And we're going to continue to do this in the future. This year, with it just being so short-term and crappy deal, we wanted to make sure that we got something here to be able to pass on and be able to carry on Dave's legacy in a little bit of a piece that we can. Dave Brandt, for any of you that don't know, they call him the godfather of soil health. He's been doing regenerative practices on his farm in Ohio since the 70s. It's just amazing to see the change and the progress that he's been able to make on his farm. And some of my team here, we've been able to be on Dave's farm and get our hands in his soils and be able to see just how incredibly far you can build up your soil health as you implement these principles in the correct manner. And Dave is all about educating and passing on that legacy to the next generation and to the next folks that are going to continue to drive this. I think it's very, very apparent that this regenerative movement, this soil health movement, it's here to stay, and it is the right space to be in. It's where the puck is going, and you're really going to see a lot of that here today. That a lot of you are already doing some of these things in your farm, some of you at varying levels, some of you new to some of these things. It's all just about taking away little nuggets, taking away nuggets from what you hear from our speakers that are from all throughout the country, and take those ideas and figure out how you can implement it for the context of your farm. With this Dave Brandt Memorial Scholarship, we want to make sure that we are bringing about that next generation of producers, folks that are newer to some of this, but those young guys that are going to continue to really carry the torch forward. And we've got two recipients that we want to bring up and showcase here today, Clinton Garrett and Troy Renner, a couple of guys that are really pushing on this regenerative journey, and we want to come on up to the stage, fellas. And want to honor these guys here today, but honor Dave as well, and we'll continue to do this in the future. Join me in congratulating our first scholarship winners, Clinton and Troy. All right, now for your speeches. I was just kidding. I was telling them that they've each got to give speeches. But no, we're going to keep things moving. Anything else we need to hit on? We're going to kind of like roll through stuff here today, okay? The restroom's out around the corner. You got to kind of go into the casino area. Please visit our sponsors throughout the whole day. The big show's going to be here later on. We are recording the sessions. So for your family members or folks that weren't able to attend, we are recording the sessions. We'll get those up on our Continuum Ag YouTube page. Probably the audio end up on our podcast as well. I'll come back up here later on, but wanted to welcome to the stage Sam from Rabo Research. He's going to key things off here for us today. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and let's welcome Sam to the stage. Thanks, sir. I'll grab you that water.
Is this too? I've got water down here.
Okay,
thanks.
cool.
Thanks. Is it that way? Yeah, okay. I'm just going to start by apologizing. I'm going to cough my way through this presentation a little bit. It might be the odd pause now and again just to get a little bit of water. Not entirely sure what's going on with that. But my name's Sam. I work in the research department at Rabobank. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Rabobank. I'll give you a couple of slides. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm very much in the L of the P&L of any bank at the moment, so here it is. But I always like to start a presentation in a kind of slightly defensive format. Picture of my grandfather and my father, probably, I suppose, in Eastern Europe back in the 30s. I'm always cognizant of the optics of someone in red glasses, foreign accent, coming from New York to talk to people about agriculture. So in Iowa. So my first point would be, I'm not actually here to talk to you about agriculture. I've got no agenda. What I'm really here to talk to you a little bit more about is actually some of the things that we see from a global corporate context. And so this brings me on to Rabobank. Rabobank is a 125-year-old cooperative bank headquartered out of the Netherlands. And we really have three prongs to our bank. That is the boring commercial stuff in the Netherlands, mortgages, things like that, high street banking. And then outside of the Netherlands, all we do is banking for energy. So that's largely energy transition, where there's that really interesting nexus between agriculture of tomorrow, today, and future energy sources. And then more importantly, banking for food. And we have a research team of about 100 analysts globally. We're split down into sectors. I'm at the top of the upstream, dealing with all the things like seeds, chemistry, fertilizers, tech, farm economics, these kind of things. And we go all the way down to the consumer foods with grains and oilseeds, animal protein, dairy, energy, all these things in between to get down to this full context. As a bank, I have been told that I have to put leading bank for global food and agri. I'm not allowed to say the largest bank for food and agri because the farm credit system seemed to get a little agitated by that. So under the context of friendly rivalry, I'll say we're the best bank for global food and agri. But this is a kind of a smorgasbord of some of our clients. So you see that we touch a lot of the bases in global agriculture. So when I'm talking to you, I am talking to you as a context of like meta information. We speak to all these guys, we see what they're doing, we see what they're doing in different geographies, and we see what they're wanting to do on a go-forward basis. We have a huge amount committed towards the agricultural space. We have an increased emphasis and focus on the sustainability agenda. So in the context of me telling you what I'm going to tell you, and then telling you what I'm told you, I'm just going to tell you 4 things which I think are really key to corporate global agricultural sustainability. The first thing is that there's many shades of sustainability. There is both a desire and also a need to blur some of the kind of lines between what is sustainable, where, and how you do it. And this basically comes to my second point straight away. It's because there's a need to build the plane while you're flying it. And this is how companies view things at the moment in the sustainability space. There's going to be a lot of goalposts moved over the coming time. You see a huge amount of commitments which are spanning from now until 2050. It's very easy as a CEO to make a commitment for 2050 when you know you're not actually really going to be doing anything towards that except setting the framework. You're not going to be accountability to the success or failure of that. So there'll be an increment of change between now and a lot of the commitments that have been made. It's a topic that's really here to stay. We're not going to get away from it. Sustainability is going to be that secular, long-driving trend in agriculture and in the broader economy going forward. Fertilizer prices are going to go up, they're going to come down, you're going to get that natural cyclicality, but sustainability is going to be here with us as a topic to talk about on a go-forward basis. And the 4th thing that I really wanted to say is there is a lot of insecurity, a lot of unknowns in the context of global corporate sustainability and food, and there's an opportunity for everyone, be that Continuum, be that us as farmers, to be that kind of connector of those non-linking synapses that are failing to understand how we bridge some of the differences with sustainability going forward. I think it's important for me to try and create a framework in the global context of what agriculture really does look like on a go-forward basis. I've mentioned briefly about a lot of these commitments. These commitments are going and they're lasting out to 2050. We're seeing people make commitments such as, I'm going to come up with a plan for sustainability. We're going to meet these goals by this time. We're going to do this within a shorter context. And we're going to have this large aspirational approach to sustainability, which is not necessarily congruent with some of the technologies that are actually in play. Some of them come to bear in the context of a supposition that there's going to be a technological breakthrough that's going to enable some of these companies to meet some of these zero carbon or sustainability goals. So we kind of create this rather simple framework of some of the push and pull factors that are coming into framing the future of global agriculture. So you have climate change, which is that real inextricable change which we see on a day-to-day basis. We see it everywhere impacting it. There is going to be a huge change on what farmers are actually capable of doing, and this will reverberate down the agricultural and the corporate supply chain. Because ultimately, when a lot of these large companies have made these huge capital investments, they need them running at that 100% utilization rate, that 90% utilization rate, to really be efficient. They need this guarantee of supply. And the intermittency and risks, oh God, I'm going the wrong way. The intermittency and risks associated with climate change are going to force companies to make a change. And this is a global kind of dynamic. Consumer demand is really driving the change into sustainability. I'm talking to a kind of a mixed audience of generations. For my sins, I am a millennial. I don't like to admit that too often. I don't like to think of myself as particularly a millennial. But consumers are asking a huge amount from growers. And so on a go-forward basis, corporates are joining in on this. So agriculture, where it's historically been the what you produce and how much of it are going to be the key markers of success for growers, it's also increasingly going to be how you do it. And that's going to be across the agricultural value chain. Everyone is started asking to be accountable for their Scope 1, their Scope 2, their Scope 3 kind of emissions. So farmers are going to feel that pressure from people who had just been off-takers or suppliers of products to actually start to make change. You're going to find these changes in relationships driven by corporations. Technology is obviously going to be a huge driver for change and an enabler of change. And I mean, it's so broad and the time constraints that I probably can't go into it with two notes. But we think about biological technologies, we think about IoT technologies, physical technologies. A lot of these technologies which are effectively under-delivered in kind of the growing concept for the previous 10 years are going to start to hit maturity and serve as a function for change practice or for accountability. And then social innovation, this is a slightly ambiguous kind of terminology that we use, but basically it is that there's going to be a reallocation, or not necessarily a huge reallocation, but a redistribution of the benefits and costs of food production globally. I think if you talk about 4 market failures from an economics kind of standpoint, one of them is obviously externalities. Externalities have never really been effectively priced by the free market. And so we're going to see an increased amount of corporation, but also governments, get involved in trying to redistribute some of these costs, some of these values along the value chain. And this is what I really mean by social innovation. It sounds scary, but I think in the near term, what it is a real opportunity with dollar signs on it. But if you procrastinate, you wait too long, there is the risk that these dollar signs, they end up materializing in a license to operate and therefore a cost structure rather than necessarily an opportunity. So we see these 4 key kind of dynamics coming into play in the corporate sphere and framing how corporates are looking at sustainability from a global standpoint. And we come up with 3 kind of narratives around agriculture. Status quo, evolution, revolution. I'm sure I can make these slides available, but I would just suggest that we just discount revolution at the moment, because it's not necessarily going to be a context which is going to materially impact how corporations currently look at things, but also how you as a farmer farm. This is towards some of those really down the technological evolution chain of where vertical farming can really become a cost competitive dynamic, and it's also kind of a little bit illusory to some of those geopolitical environments and also those scarcity issues. But when you look at it from a corporate standpoint, it's really the status quo and the evolution which are the 2 stories that are most important. I like to think of the Americas as more of a status quo kind of dynamic. It's very feed grains in orientation, whereas the evolution story is a little bit more of the European kind of context. And I think we also have an interesting divergence here in how policy is going to come about to impact how you farm in the future. This is a very simplistic view, but you can create a comparison between how the Biden administration at the moment is approaching energy transition versus the European approach to energy transition. This is not a political opinion, but actually the Inflation Reduction Act is probably going to arbitrage a huge amount of that value in the energy transition value chain to the US soils, whereas in Europe, they're going with the stick. They're going, okay, you've got to be organic by this amount. We have to have 25% organic by this amount. And they're not necessarily worrying about the competitive ecosystem that comes around it. They're just ruling by edict. Whereas in the North American market, where you've got the status quo kind of dynamic, or you've got government incentives, government policies, they're creating incentives for companies to domicile here, grow the ecosystem, create some kind of cost-competitive dynamic. And I think a lot of this is analogous to the status quo and evolution story as well, where you're going to see Europe saying, okay, well, this is our mandate. This is what we're going to do. And they're also going to start telling other countries that actually, if you want our stuff, if you want your stuff imported, this is how you subscribe to it. And this is going to form the basis of how corporations look. So when you look at a multinational, you can very often see quite a bifurcated strategy on how they're approaching corporate sustainability from a global scale. Doing one thing in Europe, doing another thing in the Americas. They're also creating these multifaceted, blurred dynamics to allow them to realign themselves under the auspices of policy changing over a period of time. But in agriculture, what we think is there's just going to be a kind of a level of continuity, similar kind of products, more efficient products, more accountability. So you're going to see, and you have seen this over the last couple of years, where you've seen a lot of your kind of large corporations who you buy your seeds from, your chemistry, your fertilizers, they've started to hedge their bets on a lot of this change practice. They've started to build out a lot of their portfolios on biological products, you know, increasing the amount of biofertilizers and biostimulants in their portfolio. And you're going to see these pushed onto you a lot more in the North American market. Biocontrol, it's a little bit, I mean, you still need some kind of technological breakthrough. This is very much a herbicidal market when you come to the feed grains, and there are basically very few in the way of biocontrol herbicides. But we're going to see an increased number of SKUs and a variety of SKUs pushed at you as these companies build out their portfolios and try and rotate some of their older technologies out of the system. You know, pushing off some of these older chemistries into other companies, phasing them out, not restating some of these labels. So this is how corporates are doing it in the agricultural sphere. They're looking to rotate some of their products. You're going to get your salespeople offering new products, different products, less familiar products, and it's all going to be bundled in with some of these new kind of contexts of how farming is going to come about. And I think each story really has its own farming model. We still think that the North American market is obviously going to be a more with less kind of dynamic. We're not prognosticating any massive changes in some of these demand dynamics. In fact, one of our inherent views is that actually there's still got to be there's still currently an anticipated huge deficit in veg oil to feed some of these renewable diesel mandates. So some of these policies are going to evolve. They're going to change. And some of these opportunities about how to farm are going to change. But it's the products that are going to come along. It's the extension interest that's going to change. And this is obviously being converged upon both from the farm inputs companies who are having these products and trying to deliver them to you, and also the downstream PepsiCos of the world, Cargills of the world, these CPG companies, the ABCDs, telling you, okay, well, we need to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, and we will pay you some kind of premium if you do it in a certain way. I think that there's some environmental constraints also around this of why these things are coming. So from a global standpoint, I've tried to create this additional framework around key constraints: land and water, both in surplus and in deficit. And this forms the narrative about how companies are positioning themselves, or how geographies are positioning themselves from an agronomic standpoint, but also how companies are likely to position themselves from a standpoint as well. And what you'll basically see is those countries with scarcity are going to be those ones that are going to have to really formulate their change on a go-forward basis. And then this will obviously dovetail down into the corporate corporate positions as well. We've seen a huge amount of commitments from companies about how they, and there's a potential of double count in this, but there's also a level of spectrum in this. So this is to the point that I made earlier of what is sustainability from a corporate standpoint. It is basically ambiguity. You have companies such as Walmart making commitments of 50 million acres. The USDA making, I think it was 25 million acres. Cargill, 10 million acres, going down. And this is just a smorgasbord of some of the corporations that are making commitments to changing their source of sourcing products on a go-forward basis. And they're going to be drivers and instigators of change. But if you backdrop this against how we see the future of agriculture coming, it is creating some interesting opportunities and interesting narratives. I myself actually come from a broiler production family where we're very kind of familiar with a tolling kind of structure. We basically do nothing but own the sheds, do the processing, get it out. Hatcheries provide us the eggs, put it in, and it's sent off to our current processors, are actually Cargill. And I think that there's, in the near term, some potential where you can see case studies and opportunities where that's going to manifest itself within the context of sustainability and field agriculture as well on an increasing basis. I'll give you one example that we have seen. I don't know, I'm assuming everyone's fairly familiar with a lot of the noise and spectrum about different types of processes to produce ammonia and nitrogen products. It's garnered a huge amount of attention. Again, it's tied a little bit towards the IRA policies of the administration. But you effectively have a variety of different ways and approaches to producing nitrogen. There's four. Let's go with four. You have grey, which is the conventional type. Blue, which is some form of carbon sequestration. Green ammonia, which is a renewable source, generally putting through an electrolyzer to create the hydrogen, and therefore it doesn't need some kind of hydrocarbon feedstock. And then there is the fourth, which is actually called pink ammonia. I've never seen it. It's basically ammonia production produced by nuclear. But in the context of this divergent form of global production, where you have the European market, where they're trying to instigate a huge amount of environmental policies, where they're also trying to impose carbon border adjustment mechanisms, and impose how they want agriculture to be done, you're seeing some interesting opportunities emerge. I was in Spain earlier on this year visiting a company in and around Madrid. And they, we believe, are one of the few commercial producers of green ammonia. So they produce ammonia via solar panels, which are 5 kilometers away, putting it through an electrolyzer, creating the hydrogen, and then producing ammonia by that. And what this has enabled companies to do is go, okay, well, I have never engaged with farmers in the past. I need that solidity of supply chain security. And I want to know how they're doing it, because I need to account for my scope 3 dynamics. What is the actual carbon footprint of this production? So we saw a name brand, large-scale beer producer partner with the nitrogen producer and their barley production, where they effectively turned the barley producer for their malting for their beer into a toller, not too dissimilar from that structure that we kind of see in broiler production. This is one example, but I can point to several other ones. There are some, this is actually a public one, so this was Heineken, but beneath that, there is a whole load more, where you've got these corporates looking to really try and form these and foster these relationships with growers. I think in the near term, this is dollar signs, and this is an opportunity. It's taking some risk off the table, potentially. Again, I'm not proselytizing. I'm just probably evoking some of my own experiences as a farmer, as a son of a farmer myself, where we've tried to hedge some of our risk and also play in the market at the same time. But it's going to be a structure that's going to be much more common, and it's much more common in the absence of real effective digital technologies sometimes as well. And you've then got another kind of case study. I'm sure we're all very familiar with McCain's, the potato chip fries or chips, or I can't remember the American terminology, steak fries, whatever it is. Largest producer of steak fries globally. They're coming out with their own policies. And their policies are very staggered as well. So they've come up with 3 key goals. 100% of their potatoes will be grown by regenerative practices by 2030. That's no time from now. I mean, again, this could be one of those ones which is adjusted. They also want to operate 3 farms as a prototypical examples of regenerative practice. And the third kind of mandate that they have is partnership with research to try and drive the ubiquity, the understanding of certain sustainable practices in agriculture. And these kind of all underpin what they have as 6 principles, which I'm going to have to read because I can't remember them all off the top of my head. Farm resilience, minimize soil disturbance, armor soil, preferably with local plants, reduce agrochemicals, build the ecosystem, and integrate organic livestock into these productions. So you have one of the largest producers of a specific food, which we're all very familiar of, taking a very hands-on approach to how, I'm going to use we as farmers produce products. This is going to become much more common. It's going to become much more common, and it is going to have an opportunity. But as I mentioned, I do think that in the near term, it's dollars, and in the long term, it's a kind of cost that could come as a license to operation if there is no kind of effort to change. Just to move into another couple of points before my time runs out. I think one interesting example of how we see corporations really adjusting their practices and potentially the sincerity behind it, and this is quite a boring example actually, is the role and the function of the corporate social responsibility officer within organizations these days. This is a kind of global dynamic which goes beyond necessarily food and agriculture. Corporate social responsibility used to basically, or a corporate social officer used to basically be little more than a PR kind of entity. They had no kind of agency or ability to drive any form of strategy. They literally were firefighters. They were adjunct to the environmental social governance strategies in. They are now a senior member of these teams. They now have direct access to CEOs, CFOs, in forming strategies. They have direct access and interaction with shareholders, stakeholders across the board to ensure that actually this governance and social sustainability is woven within the framework of these future strategies. And this is going to be a driver and an opportunity of change which we're going to see. Again, like the spectrum of commitments is so broad, there is an opportunity for everyone to partake in this. But again, there is a risk about the demand side of a lot of these products if you move too early. I think if we ask ourselves why everyone doesn't do a certain type of agriculture, it's very often the demand dynamic. Who's the offtake? Who's the opportunity? And I think that we've seen this in some other crops in the past where they've spoken, elevated their status and opportunity, but actually the demand dynamics have not been there. This feels like a slightly different dynamic with the corporates really investing in their need to engage in partnership with growers as well. And then I have touched on it previously, but I did want to just kind of highlight what we have seen in the last 18-24 months for what I call farm inputs companies, seeds, chemistry, fertilizer companies, doing in this space with regard to their portfolios. I am very sure that you guys do not look at this in the same way that I have to look at it. But the volume of transactions has been actually quite staggering. The value of these transactions has actually been staggering. You're seeing new technologies come to market, and in this kind of high interest rate environment, they are vulnerable to be raising new capital. So they're providing yet more opportunities to pass into what we call the strategic, the big guys' hands, the guys who have the brand reputation, the guys who already have the relationships with you. So if I was to come back here in 10 years, I would be talking to you about a suite and a portfolio of products which even 5 or 10 years ago I didn't really know much about. But I'm sure that you're going to start talking about these new products which are going to be within your cropping systems and within your decision-making matrix. And again, for corporates, this is nothing more than a case of building the plane while they're flying it. This has been explicitly said in a very public forum by some of the leading CEOs of some of the farm inputs companies. They don't necessarily know what they're doing about it, but they've got to keep the opportunities going. They don't want to pass up on any of these opportunities. They need to provide you, as agents of change yourself, the opportunity to actually have the choice to change practice as well. And so this comes to my final point, where in reality over the coming 10 years, flexibility is going to be key. And it's because of some of these goalposts, some of these metrics, some of these kind of statements which are going to change. They are going to evolve. They're going to have to be drawn back on. But they are still going to be there. It may be that they're accelerated for a period of time. It may be that they're decelerated for a period of time. But undoubtedly, all the corporates that we engage in have changed their policies and are looking towards sustainability on a go-forward basis. I'll just give you kind of, this will be my final point. As a bank, we have in the past come across as a little proselytizing, you know, you should do this. And this is not just to growers, this is to companies. But we're kind of caught within a little bit of a rock and a hard place. My last year was an absolute nightmare. It felt like every single pound of nitrogen that we underwrit within the value chain of global agriculture, the ECB was making us quadruple stamp it because they wanted to do it. And it's very similar for the context of sustainability as well, where we're one of those connector synapses, or connecting the synapses between what agriculture looks like today and what it's going to look like on a go-forward basis, and how we can help people up and down the value stream partake in this with a slightly seamless kind of dynamic. And if I go back to, say, 2019, and I was being told by a European regulator, look, we need to understand what some of your clients are doing with regard to sustainability and some chemicals which have been labeled in a certain category by the World Health Organization. These were the least fun conversations that I've ever had. You know, calling up one of these big majors and going, what's your policy on 1A, 1B? It was horrible. It was not fun at all. They very often didn't even know who it was that you were supposed to be talking to. But now when I pick up the phone and speak to these guys, they have these very polished dynamics, these very polished papers. They know exactly who it is. He's at the board level. He or she are at the board level. They know what their policies are. They know what their strategy is. It's a very different dynamic. So while that's a context for the farm inputs companies, it is what has changed over 3 or 4 years. Admittedly in an environment where there's been a heightened amount of stress, improved balance sheets for a lot of these guys to be able to change some of their portfolio. But we see nothing but an increased focus on sustainability coming through us to talk to you guys about it, to talk to farm inputs companies about it, to talk to CPG companies about it, and try and provide solutions on how exactly they can make and meet some of these goals, even if there's a 10, 20, 30% flux up and down on these targets on a go-forward basis. And with that, Mitchell, I will stop. Thank you very much for giving me the time to speak to you. It's always a real pleasure to be able to speak to growers and growers in the US as well. Thank you.
Quick couple questions. Maybe let's give a quick round of applause and a couple quick questions. I'm going to only let these two guys ask questions because I wasn't even planning on any, but I like you, Dave. So I'll let you ask a question, but I get to ask my question first. Okay, so and then after this, we'll do a quick break. For our next panel, we'll have like a text-in deal that we can text in our questions and stuff. But Sam, real quick, you're talking these companies have to define their entire carbon footprint, Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. We're going to talk about that some more later. This is a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Can you explain that real quick on like these companies, like what's that process for them to understand what is their carbon footprint?
It's very difficult, and this is the thing about the kind of, not only are they making, or companies making statements before necessarily they've got the tools to actually qualify and quantify it. It's more a qualitative kind of dynamic. This is a stated ambition where they might not necessarily even have the tools to do it. So they're basically throwing darts at a dartboard a little bit with a blindfold on. Best intent, they could go surpass it materially. They might have to readjust their ambitions. But I think that qualifying your Scope 3 carbon footprint for some of these companies is an issue of technology, it's an issue of data transparency, it's an issue of human capital. It's all these issues, and this is why a lot of these are going to have to be moved. And so you might think that, oh, we're under some sustainability burdens at the moment. It could be that they come in an even more aggressive format if we start to traverse environmental bounds, or if we see political pressure or anything like that. But it's an answer I don't have perfectly qualified. But my point is, within all of this, if you can provide a solution, if you can connect it, you can be a broker to this, then there is opportunity for you.
Yeah, we'll hit on some of that here later, especially within the farmer piece is becoming a little bit more clear. But yeah, at these corporate levels, defining something that's you can't really put in your hand is a huge undertaking. But anyway, we'll dig in more. Dave?
Yeah, a question I have is, since Rabo's really heavily involved in Europe and also heavily involved in the U.S., it looks like as our supply chain changes from being more Asian connected to being more Europe connected because of political situations, what's that going to do to the speed of change where Europe is using the stick and we're using the carrot, when eventually probably more of our trade is going to go towards the European market than it has in North America? So tell us a little bit about the speed of change and where we go from being encouraged to being directed here at the U.S.
Oh God, I could really get myself fired for being honest in this. So there are kind of, I was having a conversation earlier, there are a few leading indicators, and we've got a leading indicator coming soon, which is what is the response to gene editing by the European Union? And they're coming up with a ruling imminently. And I think that this is going to be an interesting lead indicator. I hold a few passports. I've grown up in a multitude of different places. I think even I'm going to have to pack my red coat away because I think I'm being naturalized before the 4th of July this year as well. But Europe is Europe. And it's very weird how it feels culturally caught with the stick. I think from an economic standpoint, you could also talk about it like the demand versus supply kind of dynamic as well. I don't see them changing too much anyway. But this is not Rabo's philosophy. This is my philosophy. This is me as a Mid-Atlantic person who's spent most of their life growing up in different parts of Europe and has been here for 10 years. There is a feeling of the museum when you're in Europe. There is a feeling of the bureaucratic juggernaut and whether or not change can happen at the pace it needs to. So I'm personally not necessarily too optimistic in some of these new technologies alleviating some of the stress in Europe. I can see what's happening in the background to try and not make the mistakes of previous technological evolutions. But we'll get a leading indicator about whether there has been any kind of material change in sentiment as a result of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I mean, I think that there's been a massive hysteresis in farming practice, you know. And by hysteresis, what I mean is the kind of a lasting impact in how growers farm even after the impact has subsided. We get the benefit as a global bank about looking about how farmers farm in Australia, how they do it in North America, how they do it in Europe, how they do it in Brazil. And Brazil is very sensitive to price dynamics, both from an FX standpoint, but also in the context of requiring 95% of their fertilizer to be imported. So they are a leading indicator to pricing. They see all the sensitivity. They also, farmers go through a more rapid decision-making process. They have the abiotic stress, which is probably greater than it is in many parts of America, but they also double crop. So if you're making, say, 42 decisions in a year, they're making at least 80 decisions in a year. So we've seen the way that they have changed. And I think that those are kind of farming practices that have shown significant benefits of being very progressive and pragmatic on technological opportunities. But I'm not saying that we have seen that necessary same level of change practice in the European market. And I suspect that might have fitted down a little bit towards some of the policy of it ostensibly continuing to be a very conservative, inward-looking kind of dynamic, even though, and Rabo don't fire me, this is my opinion, there is a need to look at every single tool in the toolbox to meet the sustainability goals, even outside of agriculture as well. So I'm not necessarily bullish on a convergence between the US and Europe on a lot of these ag policies. I hope that was a not too long-winded answer to your question, Dave.
Sam, one more quick question over here.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. The concept of having to comply with Scope 3 emissions makes me quite nauseous, actually. And I'm a little salty about it, so I will apologize in advance. It seems to me that it's the United States farmer that is going to be crammed down on this with reporting requirements and burdens. I just want to know when the big finance is going to require the real polluters on this planet in South and East Asia to comply. Because it doesn't matter what we do here if there's no effort done over there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that in all honesty. All I can tell you is the debate that goes on is not about in that context, it's not just about the qualifying today. It's also the historical legacy of pollution and the concern that we've done it and we're now saying you can't do it. And if you look at it in a very static landscape, we're not affording other emerging economies to account for their lack of historical pollution. But like that is so far outside of and I'm just reporting what the conversation has had. And to be honest, like we don't really even touch that. Like as a bank, we don't touch that. We just do food and agriculture, and that is much more of a kind of industrial kind of dynamic. I'm sorry, I can't really be too specific, but I can just tell you that that's the debate that comes up. It's okay, well, allow economies to emerge, take context of historical pollution, not just present pollution as well.
Thanks, Sam. Let's thank Sam again, and thanks for being here.